Raider Nation, you can feel the air shifting around the Raiders right now, and this isn't the usual summer smoke floating around the facility. Jobs are getting tighter, big names are under a microscope, and there's one move behind closed doors that may have quietly rerouted where the silver and black are heading. And honestly, the deeper you dig into this thing, the more it feels like the real explosion hasn't even happened yet. That's why this one matters from the jump. One area on this defense suddenly feels like musical chairs with the music slowing down fast. And it's not because the Raiders hated what they already had in the room, it's because the second a new leadership group starts investing serious draft capital at your position, the temperature changes for everybody. That puts Isaiah Pola-Mao directly in the spotlight. And listen, I've defended Pola-Mao before. The tools are obvious. He's got the size. He's got movement skills. There have absolutely been flashes where you sit there thinking, maybe this guy can still unlock something if everything clicks together mentally. But the NFL doesn't hand out lifetime passes for potential, especially not when John Spytek is trying to stack this roster with younger competition everywhere, especially not after the Raiders spent a second-round pick on Traden Stukes, a defensive back with legitimate ball production, strong coverage metrics, and the type of flexibility coaches cling to like gold during camp. That's why this situation matters more than people realize, because Stukes isn't walking into Vegas like another random training camp extra. ESPN's Ryan McFadden even mentioned that Stukes may already have one of the easiest paths toward an early starting role, and once you hear the numbers, it hits you like a cold bucket of water. Pola-Mao gave up a 70% completion rate in coverage last season. Meanwhile, at Arizona, Stukes allowed only 26.1% across 23 targets as the main defender while grabbing 4 interceptions. That gap isn't a paper cut, that's a flare gun shooting into the sky. And you already know Rob Leonard is probably staring at this secondary thinking this rookie can rotate everywhere. Deep safety, nickel, downhill responsibilities, matching speed, reading routes, all of it. That creates real heat inside a position room. Because Pola-Mao only carries a $750,000 dead cap hit if the Raiders decide to move on. That's not the kind of number that makes a front office lose sleep if somebody younger clearly outplays you during camp. And honestly, that's the ugly truth about NFL roster building. Fans fall in love with upside. Coaches and GMs have to survive reality. Stukes already made it clear he'll line up anywhere in the defensive backfield if it helps the team win. Deep safety, slot, outside corner if needed, whatever the staff asks for. That kind of mentality spreads through a locker room fast. Coaches love having chess pieces, and chess pieces create competition whether veterans like it or not. So for Pola-Mao, being decent this summer won't be enough. He has to remove doubt completely. He has to prove he's dependable, not just intriguing, because if Stukes hits the ground sprinting, this safety room could flip upside down before most fans even realize it's happening. And once coaches start trusting a rookie, those reps disappear fast. Now the mood changes completely, because there's one player on this roster who feels bigger than a jersey number, bigger than a contract, and definitely bigger than some random trade chatter floating around the league. Every single Raiders fan knows that knot in your stomach feeling the second his name gets dragged into rumors. You tense up, you get annoyed instantly. You start trying to separate facts from vultures circling overhead. Yeah, I'm talking about Max Crosby. And Raider Nation already knows the routine by now. Anytime the Raiders stumble, people outside the building start acting like they can pry the soul out of this franchise and ship it somewhere else. That's the reality when you've got an elite pass rusher stuck on a team still trying to escape years of chaos. The craziest detail in the report was that Baltimore apparently had a package involving 2 first-round picks before the Ravens pulled away from the table. Sit with that for a minute. 2 firsts. That's the type of haul teams dream about during rebuilds. But it also would have carved the identity out of this defense like ripping the engine out of a muscle car, because Max Crosby is way more than sack totals. He's energy, he's toughness, he's obsession. He's the reason this team still walks onto the field with edge even during ugly seasons. Albert Breer believes Crosby will open Week 1 in Las Vegas, and honestly, that gives Raider Nation a little room to breathe. Breer also said both sides plan on moving forward together for the foreseeable future. That should cool people off for now, but then there's that tiny crack in the wall that still lets anxiety creep through. Breer didn't slam the door completely on November, and that's where things get uncomfortable. Because if the Raiders reach that point sitting at 1-8 while Max is healthy and wrecking offenses every week, those trade calls are coming whether fans like it or not. The Rams would probably start sniffing around because they always hunt stars aggressively. Dallas has been tied to him before. Chicago has shown interest too. Any contender starving for pass rush help would stare at Crosby like he's the missing battery in a dead machine, and that is why this season carries pressure beyond the standings. The Raiders don't need perfection overnight, but they do need visible traction, structure, competence, Sundays that stop feeling random. Raider fans need to see a team that actually knows where it's going, and honestly, maybe the Ravens backing out helped calm things internally. Maybe Max sees spy tech, sees Kubiak, sees Brady involved, sees the young talent, and decides this thing deserves one real chance before judgment comes down. But Raider fans have lived through too many broken promises to relax completely. We've seen optimism melt into disaster before, so yes, the expectation is that Max Crosby suits up for the Raiders in week 1. That part feels solid. The uncomfortable reality is that by November, the organization still has to prove this future deserves to stay together. Because eventually words stop mattering and the football has to back it up. And then Max says something that honestly tells you everything about how actual football players view the game compared to the way social media talks about it. Because fans chase flashy names, television debates chase highlight reels and Pro Bowl graphics. Everybody gets hypnotized by quarterbacks and sack numbers. But when elite players start talking about the opponents who truly ruin their Sundays, that's where the real football truth lives. Max Crosby was talking with Dion Dawkins when he brought up a name most casual fans probably wouldn't even stop scrolling for, Braden Smith. That's the guy Crosby wanted to salute. And the way he described him sounded like old-school trench combat, not some polished TV segment. Crosby talked about those under-the-radar players nobody hypes up until you're lined up across from them thinking, man, this dude is a problem. With Smith, Max described years of collisions, no extra talking, no fake drama, just violent battles snap after snap, like two freight trains crashing into each other. Respect like that matters coming from Crosby because he doesn't toss compliments around like candy. He's faced enough offensive tackles to recognize who's barely hanging on and who's genuinely built for war. Braden Smith ended up signing a 2-year, $25 million contract with Houston after 8 seasons in Indianapolis, and yeah, Raiders fans probably hear that and instantly feel the bruise. Because right tackle is not exactly a stress-free conversation in Vegas right now. Colton Miller has the left side locked down. Nobody's panicking there. The concern lives on the opposite edge, where DJ Glaze still has to prove he can survive consistently. According to the report, Glaze surrendered 48 total pressures last season, including 10 sacks and 6 hits while also taking 5 penalties. That's not a tiny crack in the paint. That's the kind of leakage that wrecks drives, gets quarterbacks flattened, and flips momentum in a hurry. Now look, I'm not saying Glaze is doomed. Young linemen can improve. Coaching changes things. Systems matter. Clint Kubiak's offense could help clean things up with timing, movement, play action, and faster rhythm throws. But protection issues have a way of exposing everything else around them. That's why competition is coming whether people want it or not. Trey Zune III is the name people better remember. 3rd round pick. Flexible skill set, experience at left tackle. Some snaps at center too. And his mentality sounds exactly like the kind of guy coaches fall for quickly. He already said he'll line up anywhere across the 5 positions if it gets him on the field. Just tell him who to block and let him work. That's hungry football. That's dangerous for anybody getting too comfortable. And this is where Max Crosby praising Braden Smith loops right back into the Raiders' situation. Crosby understands what real tackle play feels like. He knows the difference between somebody surviving reps and somebody controlling them. So when people brush off the Raiders' offensive line conversation like background static, they're missing the point completely. This battle could decide how functional the offense becomes. If right tackle stays shaky, everything gets harder. But if Zune pushes early, if Glaze answers the challenge, if Kubiak finds the correct mix, suddenly this offense starts breathing differently. Until somebody truly owns that spot, though, right tackle is going to sound like thunder throughout camp. And if that edge collapses too often early in the season, the offense could stall before it ever settles in. Now let's get into something that hits differently because this isn't isn't about cuts, depth charts, or trade rumors. This is about the way the NFL views the Raiders as a brand. And I know some people immediately say none of that matters if you're not winning. Sure, winning cures almost everything, but don't pretend exposure means nothing in this league. Don't pretend visibility isn't carefully selected every single year. And somehow, once again, the Raiders are standing outside the velvet rope while other teams get pushed onto the international stage. The full 2026 NFL schedule still hasn't dropped, but the overseas game details have started surfacing, and Las Vegas isn't included. Maybe that doesn't sound crazy until you realize the Raiders haven't played outside the United States since 2019. That's the longest drought in the entire NFL. They're literally the only franchise that hasn't played an international game during the 2020s. How does that even happen? We're talking about one of the most recognizable identities in football. The shield travels everywhere. The silver and black colors travel everywhere. The logo hits globally. Even through bad football, people all over the world still recognize the Raiders instantly. ESPN even ranked them as the 7th most searched NFL team outside the United States. So how does that franchise keep missing the international spotlight while other struggling teams get shipped overseas? Washington won 5 games last year and is already headed to London. So the explanation can't simply be that the Raiders haven't earned it competitively. Plenty of rebuilding teams still get showcased, and look, from a pure football standpoint, maybe nobody inside the building is upset about staying home. Coaches probably prefer avoiding jet lag, body clock chaos, and broken routines. Players probably love keeping preparation normal. I understand all that. But from the Raider Nation side of things, it feels like the league keeps overlooking a worldwide fan base that stayed loyal through decades of turbulence. And that matters because the NFL constantly talks about growing the sport globally, especially now because there's a future angle here that could become massive. The Raiders drafted Fernando Mendoza with the number 1 pick, and the international appeal jumps off the page immediately. He speaks Spanish. He has the type of profile that could connect with fans in Mexico City, Madrid, and beyond. If the NFL is serious about global expansion, the Raiders belong in that conversation. Maybe the league wants to wait until Mendoza actually plays. Maybe they want Vegas to look more competitive first. Maybe Tom Brady's involvement as a minority owner makes the Raiders more appealing for 2027. But that's exactly where the frustration sits. It always feels like the Raiders are stuck holding a ticket while being told to wait outside one more season. Meanwhile, the fan base is already worldwide, the brand is already worldwide, and the second this team starts winning consistently again, the NFL is going to remember in a hurry how powerful the silver and black become when the lights get global. That's why this feels bigger than just a scheduling note buried in the offseason. But honestly, the deepest part of this entire conversation isn't one rookie, one rumor, one tackle battle, or one scheduling snub. It's the thing sitting underneath everything like cracked concrete under a house. Direction, actual direction, because for 2 straight decades, this franchise has dragged Raider fans through a maze with no exit signs. Not just losing games, losing while looking completely lost. Losing while selling false dawns every other year. Every time it felt like the Raiders climbed one hill, something rolled them right back down the mountain. New coach, new GM, new quarterback experiment, new slogans, same emotional wreckage, and since the move to Las Vegas, the instability has screamed even louder. The stadium looks incredible. The city feels alive. But too many Sundays have looked like the Raiders rented out their own building to opposing fans. That stings. That's not some tiny embarrassment fans should shrug off. That's a symptom of a franchise spinning its tires. And Mark Davis had to see it eventually. He had to recognize the way he operated wasn't building the Raiders he wanted. For years, he stayed too involved in the wrong areas, too reactive, too impatient, always chasing shortcuts, trusting bad processes. Meanwhile, Raider Nation kept paying emotionally every season. But now, whether people like hearing it or not, something genuinely shifted. Davis stepped back. He brought in Tom Brady as a minority owner and more importantly, as somebody whose football brain he respects. And that single move may have unlocked the entire next phase of this franchise. Because when Brady enters the football conversation, standards change immediately. The connections change. The evaluation process changes. It doesn't magically erase mistakes, but suddenly the building starts thinking with a different level of seriousness. Then John Spytek arrives as general manager with a legitimate scouting background, real talent evaluation experience, and ties to championship-level roster construction. Then Clint Kubiak takes over as head coach, bringing offensive structure, vision, and the developmental environment this organization has desperately lacked for years. That doesn't mean the Raiders are suddenly fixed overnight. I'm not throwing confetti in May pretending off-season headlines equal December victories, but this finally feels deliberate instead of random. Drafting Stukes feels like intentional competition. Handling Crosby feels like managing long-term tension carefully instead of panicking. Adding offensive line depth feels like attacking problems instead of crossing fingers. Even the Fernando Mendoza move feels like the Raiders finally realizing quarterback can't be treated like duct tape anymore. That position is the heartbeat of everything else. And honestly, the biggest credit Mark Davis deserves isn't pretending he suddenly became a football genius. It's understanding he didn't need to be one. That's maturity. That's humility. That's the type of owner evolution that can genuinely redirect a franchise. Now comes the difficult part, because structure only matters if it changes Sundays. Brady's influence, Spytek's roster building, Kubiak's coaching, Mendoza's development, Crosby's trust, every piece has to lock together. Raider Nation has heard beautiful speeches before, we've been burned before, but this time at least feels like there's an actual blueprint where football people are making football decisions with purpose behind them. And if this whole thing finally works, we may end up looking back at Mark Davis stepping aside as the moment the Raiders finally stopped drifting. But now comes the part Raiders fans actually care about most, proving it when the losses hurt and the pressure spikes. So yeah, Raider Nation, this offseason feels like a giant storm system with different fronts colliding everywhere. A rookie defensive back might shove a veteran toward the edge of the roster. Max Crosby is still wearing silver and black, but the Raiders have to prove that future deserves protecting every week. The offensive line battle could determine whether this offense actually takes off or stalls on the runway. The NFL might be underestimating how global this fan base already is, but that ignorance won't survive if the wins start stacking. And above all else, this organization finally feels like it's building with intention instead of operating in survival mode. So tell me how you see it, Raider Nation, because everybody's carrying different scars from the last 20 years. Me personally, I'm guarded, I'm exhausted, I'm optimistic anyway, and I'm ready to find out if the silver and black can finally turn all this pressure into something real. Just win, baby.